I believe we have some time for questions, certainly.
So this is a comment more than a question. When Khalid Latif was speaking, Cormac O'Malley was moving his head up and down, yes, yes. And I was troubled by that. And speak because I was troubled by it. I had a number of conversations over the years here with my late colleague Ronald Dworkin, in which Ronnie kept asking me, aren't there some things that are simply wrong? And I said, as a historian, I can't say that. I said, as a historian, I mean, specifically, he said, don't you think slavery is simply wrong? And I said, well, there are some societies that didn't think that. And slavery means a lot of different things in a lot of different places. And in any event, my job as a historian is to understand it, not to condemn it. And to the extent that I condemn it, I have a harder time understanding it. Now I go back to what I said this morning, to which there was a point. My point was that in the 18th century, when Catholicism was closely tied to political power, when toleration of Catholics would have meant not simply that Catholics and Protestants would have been the same, when toleration of Catholics would have meant that Catholics took over the English-speaking world, when French Catholics were declaring war on England because they wanted to replace William III with James II. And that would have meant fundamental change in England. Toleration was not a possibility. Now, I don't say that in a way that means that that was a good thing or a bad thing. I'm just commenting as a historian, understanding that in a world where religion is tied to power, in a world where religion to everybody is political, toleration can't exist. I think, unfortunately, that's the world we're in when we think of the West and Islam today. And much of me, as Cormac was shaking his head yes, was to agree that the experiences that Khalid has had are un-American, contrary to my concepts of equal protection as a lawyer. It is absolutely absurd if our last speaker is right that a Muslim couple can't have a Muslim marriage in Oklahoma. But at the same time that one side of me wants to condemn it, the other side of me wants to understand the phenomenon. And I don't think the two can be put together. If any of you want to try to tell me how I can condemn and still understand, or how I can understand and not have an unfortunate reduction in my ability to condemn, I'd be eager to hear it.
I think I should leave that to the panel in the first instance, and I can nod my head accordingly.
You can't condemn and understand. I don't really agree with that. I think the people I interviewed, the Muslims I interviewed in Britain and who participated in discussion groups with Irish people, we brought Muslims and Irish people together. I think there was quite a lot of condemnation of the prevent policies in Britain, of the way in which counter-terrorism policies are implicated, and these were the people who experienced in their everyday lives exactly what those were and understood them. And so I really refute the idea, because I think it's a stance academia can take that other people can't. And I don't particularly want to take shelter in that myself personally. And I just think that the notion that it's the slight implication is it's only academic knowledge, which is knowledge of and produces understandings. People's personal experiences and their articulations of them are rendering a very specific and vital form of knowledge which needs to be incorporated or taken account of when we're talking about any phenomenon. And the fact that condemnation might be intertwined through those statements does not detract from their validity. That would be my comment on it.
I also, I mean, it's not to focus just on one part of your comment, but I think it's important to understand that, if you approach this as an idea that becomes very Huntingtonian in its nature, and you pit Islam against the West, then you've pitted Islam against the West. And I would argue that Islam has a rich and deep heritage in the United States, and you have numerous records of individuals. There's Muslims who fought in the Civil War, and there's historical record on that. You have individuals who have called the United States their home for generations and generations, and I think creating a narrative that essentially pits Islam as something that's foreign and something from elsewhere is what, unfortunately, becomes complicit in many of the policies that enable Muslims to be treated the way that they're treated today. I think when we deal with the Muslim community as a monolithic community and a homogenous community, and we don't understand the diversity that exists, not just in terms of lived experience, but in terms of culture, ethnicity, and race, we then fail to really understand how to come up with viable solutions to many of the challenges that we see today. And I'm not even speaking just about the African American community, right, or the Latino community that is a huge Muslim, a huge demographic within the American Muslim community, but I'm even talking about Caucasians. And I think that's something that has to be understood. And I don't think it necessarily gets embraced as best as it could, right? Not every Muslim that's black or white has converted into Islam. And many are in a place where they've called the United States their home for a very, very long time. And I think they would have a lot of issues just with the framing of the argument that was posed. And if we're not able to move beyond that argument, then we're not going to be able to find solutions. And I would say the United States is actually very much ahead of a lot of communities in the European framework, where they're still now dealing with this idea, can you be Muslim in Danish? Can you be Muslim in Dutch, right? Most people, I would hope, are beyond this idea of can you be Muslim and American.
Except in Oklahoma.
Except in Oklahoma, right? But, and removing kind of personal bias from it, I think it's just something that has to happen, right? It's purely fact that Muslims are Americans, and there's no conflict there at all, both for the practitioner of the faith, as well as the kind of the religion itself. Like there wouldn't be issues.
Yeah, if I could just enter the debate on this issue. I'm not sure if Bill's point was about the role of the academic being to understand and not to critique or to be judgmental, but it strikes me that there's another theme through what we've been hearing the last 2 days, that's what Walter's work really highlights, and that's the role of the cause lawyer, which is precisely that of working from the impulse of outrage against injustice, which kind of, in a way calls for, not intolerance, but calls for non-understanding, not accepting where there's, serious prejudice going beyond legitimate concern about whatever it might be, the particular power dynamics of the time. And, when you think about the lessons learned or not learned, not just in the US, elsewhere too, but think about, internment of Japanese Americans, and that during the Second World War, and the idea that since that time there's been much reflection on why people didn't speak out and why there wasn't more of a reaction. Father Ryan mentioned Oklahoma. I think there are 11 states in the US which have introduced anti-Sharia ordinances, sometimes adding in international law as well, but Sharia law in particular, that it can't be cited in state courts, can't be used, and some of them are constitutional norms, some of them are statutory. So, prejudice can build, and it requires sometimes counteraction, not non-understanding on the part of others, to kind of stand up and prevent that kind of maybe understandable but unjustifiable, prejudice from spreading.
If I could say something, anti-intellectualism has a long history in the United States. The know-nothings were suitably named. The fact is that there are many people who have a knee-jerk reaction on the subject of Islam, as they did 50 years ago on the subject of socialism. So I think we have to be aware of the variations. Americans need a better education than they're getting on what the varieties. I mean, I engage at Fordham in these Jewish, Christian, Muslim trialogues, as we call them, and I've been told, I get various nasty letters saying that that's not a word in the English language. Well, actually, the first person to use it was Thomas More, to mean precisely what I mean, a dialogue between three. But the fact is, I get hate mail. And whenever we have our public lectures at Lincoln Center, where a lot of people come in off the street who are not students of the university, we screen all the questions, and we have 2 security guards there. Because I'm so concerned about that type of Yahooism, which is not connected with the search machine.
I guess just following up on the comments that are going on with this about, with respect to Reverend Latif's questions, that you've shared your experience and everything else, and why people do this, why Muslims get singled out. I think one of the big problems is, and a lot of religions have this problem too, we have obligations to show that we're not that way to the public. You got a PR problem. And your PR problem that I know is that, and actually I'm going to quote George Bush, that I think Islam permitted Osama bin Laden and that crew to hijack the image of Islam. And I know personally, one of the things I was offended by, and I'm a survivor of 2 World Trade, so forgive me, I lost people there. What I was annoyed about is that as an Irish Catholic, I grew up listening to priests yell at our audience, yell at the congregation about supporting terrorism in Northern Ireland. I heard that practically every other Sunday at Lady Mercy Church. As an American, I don't know, I knew it was a long time, at least 5 years, before I heard imams condemning the attack on the World Trade Center. Now that might be my perception, but I paid close attention to it. I even had a tenant in my building who works for CARE and all that other stuff. And we had big debates about that, about why wasn't the Muslim community out there condemning this? And my question to you about your student that was crying about people cheering the death of this mass killer was, well, are you happy he's killed? Are you, as an American, aren't you cheering? And I think that what you got to understand, it's not Yahooism, but I think and people had images of Catholics early on too that would be loyal to the Pope, will do whatever he said, that Jack Kennedy had to deal with. And I do think that religions have to put out their own PR. We have to say, we are not these people that you see us, and you need not fear us. And that's one of the things that you talk about them sending you around as the image of an American Muslim. That's one of the things that they're trying to do. The government's trying to do it. I think our own religions have that obligation. And Catholics face it with abortion and everything else when we're running for office. It's an issue we have to get at. I think we have an obligation to answer these things in a democracy. And then I have a technical question to follow up on when you answer this one.
Mm-hmm. I just want to say one thing. There were plenty of Muslims who made statements immediately after 9/11 the media gave them no attention. Yeah.
Well, and I think I would add to that. I don't know if it's a PR problem internally, but I think we have to be able to reflect on how power dynamics function as objectively as possible. And, you know, I would use myself. I've been interviewed by Katie Couric. I've been interviewed by Stephen Colbert. I've written op-eds that are published in the CNN and, you know, numerous other media outlets, both major as well as localized. And the number of interviews that I've conducted where at the end of them, the producers have said, you know, we hope this makes it to television, but we don't think it'll make it out of the editing process, is far more than anything that's actually made it on television. And the idea is that the story and narrative that is being told is one that is being very purposely told. And I would say that as objectively as possible, that, you know, you still need to have certain stories be crafted in the way that they are. And the narrative that espouses a normative understanding of Islam to be something that is inherently radical in its nature is not a narrative that comes out of the Muslim community. And the gross majority of Muslims have condemned over and over and over. And I think it also assumes something that's problematic in that we necessitate a collective responsibility of a population that shouldn't necessarily have to take a collective responsibility. I have nothing to do with Osama bin Laden. I condemn Osama bin Laden over and over and over. I think the point that maybe I didn't communicate effectively wasn't that my student had issue with the fact that they were celebrating. He actually went down there, but because he shared the name and he just heard it over and over, he couldn't move beyond the idea that perhaps their issue isn't with this man in specific, but with this religion on a whole. And maybe I won't find a place to fit in because they can't look beyond the fact that I have this one variable to my identity and understand that I'm a complex individual. My religion is one component of it. It's not even to look at that in a way that it has to be understood pejoratively, but I have a narrative attached to my name. And I don't think anybody really cares about that because they have that knee-jerk reaction that simply sees me as Muslim and then assumes with an air of intellectual laziness so many stereotypes and preconceived ideas and notions. This is what we do when we walk down the street and we see any individual, and people will do it to I'm sure when you stood up and, you know, thank you for sharing your statements, there were people who assumed 25 different things about you, and they don't even know anything about you. But just because of your response to my comments, they would think that you were already pigeonholed into a certain place. And I could almost guarantee you there's people in this room who think you have no understanding of Islam and you have no understanding of what Muslims go through. I don't think that, but I think there's people who would assume that based off of your comments. And that's what the danger is of stereotyping, because we don't then get to really understand anything that comes beyond just that kind of laziness we have in exerting that kind of stereotyping. And I think that's what unfortunately happens to a lot of Muslims. And when we approach this way that says Muslims are X and Muslims are Y, and we don't understand the diversity that exists in the population, we see that there's things that can happen. Muslims are this, don't let them build mosques in your neighborhood. Muslims are this, don't vote for this man, he might be a Muslim, right? And then you deal with a population that can be substantiated in their fear, but the narrative that they're getting is the narrative that they have access to, and it's a narrative that is being pushed through a media engine that then is cutting out the discourse that says, that's not what we believe, right? And in the absence of viable institutions that, again, now we have to look at things holistically. If Muslims can't give in charity to fund institutions that would launch PR campaigns because they are scrutinized at every level of scrutinization, the PR campaign is not going to exist. It's just not going to exist because I have to be able to justify every cent of every dollar that I'm spending because somebody else is watching it, right? I myself have been visited by the FBI 3 times, in my home twice and in my office. And when they've come, it's, you know, you look suspicious because you were working for the police department. Why are you doing that? It's like, what do you mean, right? You know, you look suspicious because you were having lunch with John Brennan. You know, what are you trying to get out of that? He invited me. And the reality is such that the idea that you are innocent until proven guilty doesn't apply the same way. More so it's, we're gonna think suspicious of you until you can meet a certain standard that we say you are now accepted. And that's what intolerance is, right?
I just wanted to add a bit of my experience. I'm sort of an anomaly. Professor Nelson is my father. I was born Muslim. My name is Layla. I was born in Iran. And I have an American passport that says I was born in Iran. My name is Layla. My last name is Nelson. We have these discussions daily in our home. And post 9/11, I work with animals. And post 9/11, I was down at the site every day for 3 months, bandaging the feet of the search and rescue dogs, who would daily come back to me with bits of clothing and bits of people. And I would leave every day covered in blood, and I often wouldn't be allowed to go back the next day because they wanted to see people's passports. And when they saw that I was born in Iran, they didn't want me to be down at the site again. And one day there was a news crew from Channel 7, Eyewitness News, who was interviewing me for the Humane Society with the dogs. And when I was leaving, I saw one of the National Guard with the guns whispering to them about, I assume, me, and this entire interview that was supposed to air never did, and the guy just sort of looked at me and waved his gun, and that was the end of it. And it happens constantly, and I am checked at least once a week on the subway, and I too love those rooms in the airports. And my father has come to know them as well by my side. But I think this sort of new American experience, a new Muslim experience, or a Muslim Catholic in my life experience is something that people find unfathomable and don't know where to place these people. And I have an experience that's very similar to yours and yet so different. But society wants to, when you're in the middle of two things, society wants to throw you over onto one of the sides. And they choose the easiest side to toss you into if they don't want to have a discussion, a rational discussion of what could possibly be going on. People don't understand. Police officers have said to me, "What do you mean your last name is Nelson?" And that's the answer that I get. And when I'm trying to have a logical conversation wherein I don't actually want to kick someone. And so but this sort of new America, and this is what my household is. My brother is from Guatemala. I am from Iran. My father is Italian and Swedish, and my mother is Sicilian and German. This is our America. And we have this problem every day with regard to me and traveling with. I hate to travel with them. I hate to hold them back for 7 hours somewhere. But it happens, and it's people's lack of understanding of what a new America is, and finding that path.
I actually think that we probably need to wrap up. And on that note of what a new America looks like, that strikes me as a note that resonates so profoundly with this, to find experiences that resonate over a 200-year period in this way, in historical circumstances that are vastly different, shows, I think, the pertinence of the Catholic question and of this case. So we'll adjourn.